Good Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Water Climate Control Volquest.com podcast, the mailbag edition with Rob Lewis, Austin Price, and Jesse Simonton. Brent Hubbs, glad to have you along with us. Again, be sure and check out Blue Water Climate Control at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com, or you can visit them on Twitter at BlueH2O_climate. And let's jump into things before we get into a couple of mailbag questions. Rob, Tennessee. Not surprising here. I think there's a couple of questions in the mailbag about it, but Tennessee loses Jaylen Johnson. You had the story on it this morning, just kind of what it means for Tennessee. How realistic is it, you think, to get a grad transfer? And I'm assuming you were not surprised by the Jaylen Johnson move.
No, I mean, we talked about it in the podcast. I mean, I don't want to go all AP here, but we pretty much mentioned it in the War Room. I guess it was a month or so ago that, if you're fifth-year senior who was averaging 12, 15 minutes a game on this year's team, and Tennessee's bringing in Jaden Springer and Keon Johnson, you're probably giving a long thought to looking around. So, not any kind of a surprise, and certainly no animosity on either side. I mean, I think Rick Barnes, he put out a polite statement, but that wasn't just coach speak. I mean, him and Jaylen had a good relationship. It just, not going to be able to play a lot, but it's pretty easy decision, I think, on Jaylen's part for what he's going to do next year. And I think he's the kind of guy that will move down and could really be a nice player for somebody at the mid-major level.
He really improved a lot, Rob. I mean, he wasn't spectacular, but he showed signs of life this year, right? More so than in years past.
He did. He had some nice games. I mean, he was a factor at the big win at Kentucky and a couple threes. I mean, yeah, but again, you're looking at a backcourt next year let's bring him. Only lost Jordan Bowden, bringing back Viscovi, bringing back Josiah James, Victor Bailey gets eligible. You're adding two 5-star top 20 recruits in Keon Johnson and Jaden Springer. Jaden averaged 15 minutes a game this year. I think that number was probably going to go down, maybe a lot, maybe to almost zero. And so I think it was just an easy decision for him. If you're a fifth-year guy, you don't want to be the third or fourth guy coming off the bench when you could go somewhere. I'm just throwing this at, UNC Greensboro maybe. That's a NCAA tournament type team in the Southern Conference. Maybe he lands there. He's from Durham. I would suspect that he will end up somewhere back in the Carolinas. I don't know that. I'm just speculating. But he's a guy that I could see at a Southern Conference school that level being a really valuable piece of somebody's team.
Well, we'll certainly talk more about that throughout the mailbag here because there's a couple of questions about where Tennessee goes next, but not earth-shattering news there. Jesse, you had the story yesterday with comments from Jeremy Pruitt that he made on ball calls, just kind of about his approach to things. And it's kind of ironic, I think, you mentioned this in the story, Jesse. Jeremy Pruitt has the reputation. It's all ball all the time. He made it clear Monday night right now it's not about ball at all.
No, I mean, I fully believe it. I think, both privately and publicly, he's showing kind of a softer side through this whole crisis. And his priority right now and main focus is kind of twofold. It's making sure that the guys, his players, their families are safe. And then secondarily, it's academics. And with the Thornton Center access being closed, campus being closed, the facilities being shuttered, how does Tennessee and the staff make sure that these guys continue to do their work academically? He kind of talked about the adjustments of so many guys having, now transition to online classes, something many are not used to. And again, this is a challenge that, every school in the country is having to deal with. But I just think it's notable that, for a guy who is pretty brash and can be pretty blunt at times, that, he has certainly shown a much softer tone through kind of this whole crisis right now.
Austin, you've visited with Coach as well. I mean, Jesse's right. It's not a public coach speak thing with where his mentality and his mindset is.
No, sometimes he'll tell me things in confidence, and that it differs a little bit from what he might say in a press conference. But no, this was the same thing he told me a week and a half ago, Brent. When I talked to him, it was the same exact answer. And he's I think it's a little easier to look at it from this because again, this isn't something where a few people are sick, but I mean, people are dying. So I mean, like, I think it's easier to look at this with a different look. And at the end of the day, everybody is not practicing football this spring. I mean, yeah, some got more practices in than others, but I mean, I think for a lot of these coaches, it's look at the big picture here. It's about safety. Look at some of these other sports leagues. The NBA obviously is at double digits with the number of players that have tested positive. You've had senators, you've had actors and actresses. I mean, this is touching everyone, and so I maybe a surprised to begin with, but not surprised to see him be as candid about the fact that there's a lot more important things than the pigskin right now.
Yeah, as we get into the mailbag questions here, I will say this: in talking to numerous administrators and coaches on campus the last few days, the academic side of things is the most important deal. That's the one where everybody's, I don't want to say overly concerned, but that's the thing they're all trying to manage, and that's the thing they're all trying to keep a handle on, and their biggest concern moving forward that way. All right, let's jump into the Blue Water Climate Control mailbag podcast here with the mailbag questions. We'll start with Simpsonville, and I'll throw this out to anybody that wants to jump in there. Will there be permanent changes to the college sports processes, culture events, etc., due to this situation? Do you guys think there will be major changes? I think the biggest change is how much people are going to spend discretionary income moving forward. I think that's the biggest change we'll see. I think if it's, I don't, maybe we play with limited crowds or something right now, Jesse, but I think we'll get back to the full crowds. I think the biggest question is what's attendance going to look like with discretionary income?
Yeah, attendance. I think this is also going to have folks kind of really pontificating about scheduling, timing. Depending on how this goes with both basketball and football, how it lingers. I think there's going to be a lot of discussions for recruiting and the recruiting calendar. But as we've stated throughout this whole deal, I mean, it's a fluid process, and it continues to kind of unfold each day. I mean, today, as we sit here and record this Wednesday, Mark Cuban's saying optimistically, he hopes that the NBA could maybe start just before June. But then on the other side, you got, the baseball folks are apparently arguing about they don't think they can start until well after July. And how do these leagues manage, the different, the players in terms of, when they're allowed to come back, year deals and stuff. And so it's an ongoing deal, and it seems to unfold differently every day.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. All right, let's go to All Orange, who's got a question. Rob, Austin, you can jump in here. Who do you think that are the top 5 recruiting assistants during the time you've covered college football? Jesse, you can as well. At least one who coached at Tennessee. Who's the most underrated assistant as a recruiter in your time covering Tennessee? This guy suggested Latrell Scott, even though he wasn't here very long. The best recruiter I ever covered and dealt with was Rodney Garner.
And it stole it out of my mouth.
It wasn't close when you look at what he did in '97. Look, I mean, Georgia was down. I get that. But when you go to Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, and you get Fred Weary, and then you go to Georgia and get Deion Grant, Jamal Lewis, Cozy Coleman, then you to me, you're at the top of that list. In terms of underrated, I don't think he's underrated now. I think at the time he was underrated. Austin, I would put Sam Pittman on that list. He was not at Tennessee very long, but any conversation you had with him, you could tell pretty quick he was going to be a good recruiter. He had been a solid recruiter at other places. He obviously took it to another level at Georgia, which ultimately helped him end up getting the Arkansas head job.
Yeah, I think he was underrated in his ability to relate and to be a guy that you knew you could see that in him, but you're right. Took it to another level when he got to Georgia, and 5 stars and big names were more readily available with what they were doing down there. But did a nice job there as well.
I can't believe nobody's give the big fisherman a shout out, Philip Fulmer.
Well, but I don't think he was underappreciated. I mean, but you're saying one of the top. Yeah, I mean, the guy could close.
You said Rodney Garner.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's true. All right, let me. He said top 5 recruiting assistants. Philip as a head coach. I didn't cover.
Okay, you're right. I forgot the assistant part.
But he was a good head. He was certainly good. Jesse, give me somebody you've covered in your places that you thought were one of the best. Give me somebody underrated, maybe who at Georgia or Florida and some other places you followed in recruiting.
Well, this name will not be. He does not kind of have the shine as much anymore because of what unfolded at Maryland. But at Florida, and then he's quickly got the job at Michigan because of his recruiting prowess, was DJ Durkin. And he's a guy who worked. He's a guy who, he's worked for Urban. He's worked for Harbaugh. He has obviously ties with Muschamp. And now he's at Ole Miss, with Lane as the defensive coordinator. So again, the shine has worn off on him because of the tragedy that unfolded at Maryland. But he was a really good recruiter during my time covering Florida. AP, your boy Walt Wells was probably a little underrated here in the end in terms of just, he got Tennessee, I think, in the door and kind of honestly got the ball rolling with some guys that they didn't have a lot of traction with.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he was the one that was standing on the table for Jerome Carvin when most of the previous staff did not want to take Jerome. And then, of course, he got him up here a bunch of times, and then the new staff came in and finished him off. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at his track record at Kentucky and the fact that he had them in play with several guys in this state and others, and was kind of the first guy to get in there and offer some of these kids. He was the first in on obviously a guy like Adnan Mitchell in this 2021 class when he was at Kentucky. So I think that hurt Kentucky as well. And of course, Trooper Taylor had his hand as a good recruiter.
Good point.
There's been a few here over the years. Niedermeyer had a 1-year big splash. He came back down to earth last year quite a bit, but I think he can be right back in that same conversation this year. I just think, it was never I think he tried to replicate what he did the year before. I thought that was always kind of, far-fetched just based off the fact that what he did the year before as a first-time on-the-field coach was, out of this world.
And on Trooper,
go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say on Trooper, he landed guys who were highly ranked, but, I'm probably missing some guys who turned out to be good players, Hubbard. But if you go back and look at all the percentage of bust that he had, these are kids that everybody wanted, but Demetrius Morley, Gerald Williams, Lennon Creer. Trooper seemed to specialize in that kind of guy.
Yeah,
almost.
He missed on some guys, but he had some receivers. Meacham, Brett Smith, some of those guys he was.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Had Brett Smith, but Meacham was a pretty good one there.
It's a long time ago.
I'll throw out an interesting name. See what you guys think about this one. Because he was not that great his 1 year here at Tennessee. I got to know him a little bit. First year I arrived here, but Charlton Warren, since leaving Knoxville, has been really good. Now he kind of faced an uphill battle because he was on a dead man walking staff the year he showed up. So Terrell Bailey and some of the guys he landed obviously do not compare to what he has since landed at Florida and then now at Georgia. He always had the personality that it struck you that he would be good in a living room with parents, kind of the Air Force background and just kind of his no-nonsense attitude. But he's landed some dudes the last few classes, again, both at Florida and Georgia. And so that did not help Tennessee a lot because he was only here for that 1 year, but he's kind of developed into a guy that I think is pretty well regarded nationally.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, I think it's also a great example of the challenges that recruiting to Tennessee presents versus recruiting to Florida, recruiting to Athens, Georgia, because of the geography that you've dealt with and some things like that. Because there have been some highly regarded recruiters that have come through here that did not have success. And again, part of that with Charlton Warren was he was here 1 year, as you mentioned, on a dead man walking staff. All right, let's continue on with the questions here. What impacts of the virus, with the impacts of the virus, my opinion is that the current powerhouses like Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, et cetera, are going to likely benefit the most in recruiting. Do you agree? Outside of current powerhouses, what schools could benefit from and what schools could be hurt by the current situation in recruiting? Where does Tennessee fall into that? Austin, we've seen Ohio State have a run, so what do you think?
I agree with this. I think that the schools that have had success, there are going to be plenty of teams that are plenty of recruits that look at them and go, they're just a safe pick here with all that's going on. I don't think Ohio State has told kids, hey, you got to get in now or you don't have a spot. But I think that they have kind of played the whole, with this whole uncertainty, who knows how visits will take place. I mean, and kind of planted the seed of doubt with several kids. And I think that's why you've seen them get on this run here of late. But I do think that it benefits. I think any team that has a good in-state base, it benefits in this current crop. So, and when I say in-state base, it does not mean it has to be inside the state. It just needs to be within a 4-hour radius. So, like if you feel good about where you're at in a 4-hour radius, I think you can do pretty good in this class.
I do think it was interesting, in terms of where does Tennessee fall into this? What are they doing? I thought it was interesting that Jeremy said on Monday that, the fact that the staff isn't together, that it's actually allowed them to actually have a greater focus on recruiting right now. The emphasis is a little bit higher because you're not game planning. You're not kind of doing practice planning stuff in terms of spring practice. You're not watching film of your own team. And so this staff has proven, the last 2 years that they're going to mine, as deep as they can and scour as far and wide as reaching. I mean, Tennessee's extended more offers than really anybody in the country. So I think that, you could see Tennessee maybe find some more guys that perhaps they weren't in on a month or two ago. Once we come out of this whole deal, that suddenly Tennessee's going to pop for a few guys that maybe we haven't talked about at all because we don't know. We've never seen them or whatever, and then suddenly Tennessee's in the mix with somebody.
Well, here's the other thing. I think when you go think about it, like players like L.J. Johnson, and I'll bring him up a lot because, he was a guy that was set to visit here at the end of the month. It's
Big
probably
Texas
more realistic. Yeah, it's more realistic that he stays in state because think about it. If let's go off the July 1 number. We talked about this the other day. If he, if things open up July 1, where's he going to go visit in the 3 or 4 week run if they make the month of July open, which I'm sure they will. I mean, it's just kind of common sense to me.
If we're back,
with it being, yeah. So, I mean, like, where's he going to go visit in that 3 or 4 week run? And then the high school coach is going to be saying, hey, don't go too far. It's going to be natural to go to Texas, Baylor, A&M, Oklahoma, schools that aren't too far from where he's at. So that makes Tennessee really, unless they can get an official visit in the fall and he doesn't do anything anytime soon, it makes Tennessee a really, really tough place to see him landing at. And I think there's a lot of kids like that are, 8 or so hours or more away that, like, Tennessee may have a decent relationship with those kids, but at the end of the day, if this thing is kind of condensed into a smaller time frame, it's going to be tough for Tennessee to be a real player for some of those kids. That's why you've got to rely on in-state kids. You've got to rely on kids in Georgia that you have a good relationship with. You got to rely on North Carolina and several of those top players.
I don't know about y'all, but I think that if this thing goes deep into the fall where the football season may even have to be truncated or whatever, I think there's a realistic chance they end up eliminating their early signing period because of this for this 1 year. Now, again, that we're talking about some really bad things happening if we go that deep into the summer schedule, but I do think it's at least a possibility to kind of acknowledge.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of coaches out there advocate for that because of the missed time that they've had in recruiting for establishing the relationships. Now, would kids be on board with that? Would the NCAA listen to it that way, or would they see that as kind of coaches whining a little bit? I don't think there's any doubt that there's going to be coaches who are going to be pining for that when we get to that point of things being back open. All right, let's go to CD Vol here. One player that Tennessee has signed in football in the last 10 years that you questioned why Tennessee took them, but they ended up being a good player here. I like this question. I actually did some research for this one. I'm going to throw out, Rob, I'll start with you. I'm going to throw out 3 or 4 names here that jumped out to me. Jordan Williams ended up being a better player here than I thought he would be.
Gainesville,
Tennessee
Florida's
took him.
own.
Yeah, Florida did not want him. That's always a red flag. Did not have a great start to his career. Found a spot at the end to the point that he got on an NFL roster for a while. Tennessee took Jaylen Robertson over some other guys. He ended up being a good player. Maybe the biggest. maybe the biggest for me is Emmanuel Mosley, just because, look, he was a high school quarterback who was tiny that everybody wondered what the recruiting office had found. A shout out to Scott Altizer for finding him, and he starts in the Super Bowl this year. So Emmanuel Mosley is going to be my number one because I didn't think he would be, based on his sheer size, I didn't think he could be a factor at Tennessee.
Oh, Mosley, I'm not saying you stole that out of my mouth, but he would totally be the answer to my answer to that question. I mean, the kid, God, what did he weigh when he got here?
About $140? No, about $145.
$145. It's like a young pole vaulting Britt Hubbs right there.
I'll throw out two more names.
All right.
Because I did a little research on this too. Now I know that I don't know if folks questioned when he got signed. I was not here when he got signed, but John Kelly was a lowly 3-star who basically did not have a spot ultimately at Michigan and Michigan State. They ended up taking other guys from that Oak Park team. Tennessee gets him. I mean, he ended up being very productive, for 2 years, 2 of his 3 years here. And then another guy who we don't know how his career is going to finish, but I think some heads were turned when Austin Pope got signed. And, Looky Lou, I mean, he was Tennessee's most effective tight end last season. And now Tennessee is really counting on him, to stay healthy and kind of have a formidable senior season, kind of basically broadening his game and not being just their lead blocker, but kind of adding some, elements as a pass catcher, something that's what he kind of came to Tennessee to do. So two other names I just want to throw out there.
Yeah, he's not on the Emmanuel Mosley level as far as a hidden gem, but I think Cam Sutton is a guy that really, outperformed, what was probably expected of him as a 3-star. I mean, a guy that's turned into not only a really good cornerback, but one of the best punt returners in college football.
Yeah, that's for sure. Austin, back to Austin Pope, you followed him a lot. I think everybody wondered whether or not he was going to be physical enough, and ironically, his physicality is what's ended up getting him on the field at Tennessee.
Yeah, I was never surprised by his physicality.
Really?
I mean, he's athletic, and he didn't mind physicality. He loved to play linebacker when he was at CAK. So it was not a surprise that, he liked to mix it up and be physical, to me, at least to me.
Well, you saw him more than anybody else did.
Yeah, I mean, I saw him when he was at Sevier County, and he really played receivers exclusively then. And then when he moved over to play at CAK, he played a lot of tight end / receiver. It's all the same in that offense. And then played a lot of linebacker on defense. And I thought he was just as good as a linebacker at the high school level as he was as an offensive weapon. So not surprised at all that he ended up getting the physicality. I'm more surprised that he was able to come back from the back problem, because, I mean, that was really something that I thought, when you start getting back issues, it's tough to overcome those.
Yeah, certainly.
We did that. I will say this. I do think Jay Sean is like the ultimate pick here. Yeah, Mosley did start for the 49ers this year, but I wouldn't say, based on this question, that he was like a quote unquote had a good career at Tennessee. I would say he was fine. But Jay Sean, the fact that he was literally asked, I mean, we did that big story on him, Hubs, and he was literally asked to blue shirt, and he didn't even know what that was. I mean, he was like a 2-star who was asked to blue shirt, and then, sure enough, he ends up starting umpteen, games for Tennessee, and has a long starting stretch. So he is ultimately my pick for this answer.
And by the way, if you want to get depressed and wonder why Tennessee struggled the way they have, go back about 10 years, start looking at maybe like the 2012 class and see just how disappointing some of those guys were and did not finish at Tennessee. You go through 3 or 4 of those classes in a row, you understand why Tennessee's been where they've been. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Blue Water Climate Control. Allergy season is here with the sun coming out today and things popping into bloom. Allergy sufferers are going to be looking for some good airspace, some place to get out of the allergies. But do you know that pollutants in your home are 2 to 10 times worse than outdoors? Blue Water Climate Control offers solutions to protect your airspace by a variety of ways, including controlling the dirt and dust that accumulates inside your system. Evans, what does he do? Okay, would he really want to take visits, or would he want to be on campus and start practice for some school he chooses? Same type of question for any potential grad transfers out there. Putting all these free agent players to go back to the colleges that they're at, are going situation. Jesse, how does it affect the grad transfers, and then how does it affect Zach Evans?
I mean, if Zach Evans, I think, is going to be a kind of story unto his own because, ultimately, I think most folks thought that he could just show up on campus whenever, teams basically start those Maymesters or summer semesters anyways. And I think that remains kind of the case. Whenever kids are allowed back on said campus, whether it's Tennessee, Ole Miss, or, basing on Austin's theory, could he, for the 2021 running back, does he ultimately just decide to say, hey, with all this going on, I'm just going to stay closer to home? The grad transfers, I just don't think you're going to see many more in terms of this 20 class. I think that there may be a couple. Tennessee obviously got the punter, but I don't think that there's going to be a ton of movement kind of, for the rest of this calendar year. I think you're going to see a lot more, perhaps, movement, obviously, for the 2021 class.
Austin, give me your thoughts on Zach.
Well, I agree. I think that Zach's either just going to show up to either Ole Miss or to Tennessee. And I think maybe there's a slight chance that he pulls a shocker and ends up at A&M. But to me, it's probably Tennessee or Ole Miss. He's just going to show up. I mean, I think he's having, dialogue with both those schools still. As far as grad transfers, I mean, like, how can you take a grad transfer? And Brent, you and I talked about this, kind of off, in our conversations. How do you take a grad transfer if they're not going to arrive to who knows when, and then how quickly can you get them ready? Now I'll say this: a guy like Chase Hayden or anybody like Chase Hayden that has 2 years to play, I think that changes things for them. I think they're way more attractive than a 1-year guy because if you can't get them on your campus till July or August or whatever, because let's face it, a guy like Chase, he was wanting to take visits over the next, month. All of a sudden, that's off. So let's say he can't take visits till July. That means he's not showing up till August. And then you look at some of these guys on this current team that were probably going to go through spring and kind of evaluate where they are and then make a decision on whether to, bounce out and grad transfer or go into the portal or whatever. How are they doing that with no spring practice? I mean, that to me, that's going to be a leap of faith either to stay or go by those guys, and probably more of a leap of faith to stay than go because if you've not, again, kind of like Jaylen Johnson, if you've not played up to now, what are the chances with more talent coming in you're gonna play now?
Well, I think anytime if you're a 2-year grad transfer, you're always more attractive, but in this case, you're definitely more attractive. Let's go to Galilee here with a basketball question. Rob, I know you have an opinion on this one. He says he's one of the few that feels playing Memphis in basketball every year helps both schools. Is there anything positive that comes from that annual game in basketball?
That's such a hot button issue with fans. I mean, I totally get that the fans dig it. I mean, mostly I think Tennessee fans that live in Memphis or just Tennessee fans in general that hate Memphis. Man, I mean, I don't think it's a big deal. I mean, if Tennessee ends up getting Kennedy Chandler, is that going to have anything to do with the fact that 2 years ago Tennessee played an early December game in Memphis? I don't think so. I mean, they're they play in a conference that's a skosh above being mid-major. I get why fans like it. Nationally, I think Tennessee is. I mean, the way Rick schedules playing, which they're getting ready to do. I mean, they're much better off playing Gonzaga, somebody like that. I mean, you think who do you think gets you more exposure? Playing an unranked Memphis team that's not been in the NCAA tournament in how long, or playing Gonzaga?
Yeah,
I mean, come on, give me a break.
Yeah, I think it benefits Memphis a lot more than it benefits Tennessee.
Oh, no question.
I get the rivalry. I get the rivalry part that fans like that, but from a national perspective, I don't think it's of great benefit to Tennessee to do that. Let's go to Pine Mountain Vol here. We've talked about players missing spring practice and who it hurts. If the SEC gives extra practice time this summer, who would be some of the players that might benefit from a delayed spring? Example, Wanye Morris. And also, do you see Chaney using more two running back sets? I don't know about the 2 back sets, but I think when you look at guys like Wanye Morris, Quavaris Crouch, nobody wants to be in this situation. But if they get if the NCAA gives some extra time in June to work with coaches, there's no question those 2 guys coming off injury would benefit from that fact, particularly Crouch because he's moving to a new position if he's going to move inside.
Yeah, I agree with this, Jesse. I don't know how you feel about it, but it's almost like the whole notion that if the NBA, and I know Durant's somewhat shot this down, but if the NBA doesn't start till a certain time, maybe Kevin Durant can come back and play the back end of this season with the Nets currently being in the 8th spot in the East. So like, it's a little bit different because it's practice versus game action. But for those guys, they were going to miss spring. All of a sudden, they get an extended spring, which actually doesn't take place until July. A guy like Wanye or Quavaris Crouch, to me, that's a big benefit. But it's also a benefit for anybody, in my mind, that has a leg up on the other guys, because I think that ultimately you're going to ask. It's a lot to ask for a true freshman like a Bryson Eason, so to speak, to come in and learn a ton in such a short manner. Same thing with a guy like Harrison Bailey, who got 2 practices in, but that's not going to equate to trying to chase down the top spot on the depth chart.
I will say I'm going to kind of sit on the fence on this one for now. And part of that is because I'm just skeptical that even if they do open up or allow some extra practices in July, about how I think a lot of those are going to be in shells. And I do think it's going to be pretty I think coaches are going to be pretty cautious because, for fear of injuries and fear of ramping and stuff up too quickly. So schematically, I think it will be important for a guy like Quavaris Crouch because he's learning a new position. You're doing a lot of those kind of walkthrough type drills. Little more difficult for a Wanye Morris or even a Darnell Wright in terms of just how can they continue to improve physically. How can they kind of continue to improve those fundamentals if you're not really hitting that much? So I'm going to sit on the fence on this one. I am very curious to see how this plays out. But I do agree with AP that, and we've talked about this before privately, publicly, I think the spring, missing the spring has killed a guy like Harrison Bailey's chance to unseat JG. However realistic or unrealistic that was, the fact that he is, missed those 15 practices or 13 practices, I think that all but closes the door on him starting week 1. Now, maybe he can, come into the fold later in the season. But I think, to AP's point, guys that have experience, they're going to be the guys that the coaches lean on early.
Let's piggyback this right here and discuss something before we move on to the next question. Let's talk about the quarterback room, because we all, and I think everybody kind of felt like you're going to go through spring. You're probably going to lose 1, if not 2. Now you don't have a spring. So, again, do those guys stick around and have that leap of faith to stay? Or do they get antsy, worried about losing another year of eligibility and bounce out of here right now without having went through spring? I think it's an interesting dynamic.
I think the biggest question is what are their options if they choose to leave?
Sure.
Who's interested in them at this point in time? What kind of commodity are they? I think that's the biggest question any transfer has to ask, particularly a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great point. And most assume that one of Maurer or Shrout or possibly both would not be here come, May 1st, May 8th. And now what incentive do they have to leave, to Hubbs's point, and to your point too, AP, that if they don't have a landing spot or an obvious landing spot, what do you, kind of risk it and say, hey, I'm going to throw my, hat in the ring come fall camp? Or do they just say, hey, I don't want this to be a wasted season. I'm going to go ahead and put my name in the portal and use this as my quote-unquote redshirt season or transfer season. Now, Shrout's already redshirted. Obviously, Maurer still has that. But how that unfolds is going to be quite curious. And quarterbacks are going to be the sexy pick here. But someone even asked earlier in the chat or questions things about just general guys who may transfer. I do think this whole deal is going to kind of suppress some movement, because where are you going to go?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think that's the big unknown is, do you want to get into that? All right, let's go back to a basketball question here. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Kaz Kramer wants to know, Anasicki has connections to Tennessee, Rob. Hearing any good news on him? Where do you think Tennessee is in terms of how much they like Anasicki? He says he's going to announce something at the end of this week, having not seen anybody. What are the Vols in the race for Anasicki, the transfer?
As I hinted pretty strongly on the board yesterday, I think Anasicki's a take, and right now I think he ends up at Tennessee. I think we get that news in the next little bit. I think that Tennessee feels like they really need front court help. They've been recruiting Musa Cisse, who the 5-star kid out of Memphis. He's not been to campus yet. I mean, that's not a knock on Tennessee. He's not been anywhere except for Florida State. But they're competing against Kentucky. They're competing against Memphis, where he is at Lausanne High School. I mean, he's obviously got you got some Memphis connections for even.
He's reclassifying, right, Rob?
He's going to try. I don't know what. I mean, as I spoke to someone yesterday who said that's still the plan. How that is taking place with the shutdown and all that, I don't know. But apparently that's still what he's going to do. But, Tennessee's fighting Memphis. They're fighting Auburn. They're fighting Kentucky. I mean, I'm not going to have to spell it out for you. That's tough.
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing on the reclassifying. He goes to a private school, right?
Yes.
So I guess they're doing all their online – not all the public schools are doing online stuff. So I guess – he's continuing with his academics through the private school, or they may even be going to school. So maybe he can get there. But for anybody trying to reclassify, it's not a laydown to me at this point, because I don't know if you can get all your academic work done.
Yeah, right? I agree. And as you mentioned, I think it is a little different at the private school level, because they don't have all the, they don't have to coordinate 20 different high schools in a county. They can just, they can do their own thing. On Anasicki, I think what works in Tennessee's favor is he's going to decide quickly. He's not taking any visits. He released a top 7 yesterday that kind of shows you who's interested in what kind of player he might be. Gonzaga's on there. Louisville's on there. It's so I mean, this is not somebody that Tennessee's fighting a bunch of bottom feeders for, and he's going to decide on Friday, and he's not taking any visits. I mean, how many times do you think he was here? I mean, as most know, we're talking about a kid who's Nikki Anasicki's younger brother, former Lady Vol. He's probably been on Tennessee's campus 50, 60 times to watch her play. So I think he ends up here. Unique player. I mean, he's highly productive. I mean, certainly that's at a different level. He played at Sacred Heart. Probably, I don't even know if that's mid-major. It's probably low major. But he averaged 16 points, 12 rebounds a game. And I don't think he's going to be a double-digit scorer, but rebounding historically is a stat that translates kind of, no matter where you go. And I think that's what Tennessee wants, is front court help.
But he's not
and that was always something she brought to the table with the Lady Vols.
Yeah, she was. She was a very good rebounder in her career. Interesting, he's not that traditional 6'10", 6'11" type guy. I mean, it's a different style. As you mentioned, different style post player who's productive in there at his height.
6'6", 250. I mean, he's not going to be a rim protector, which I think is something Tennessee ideally wanted with this spot. But again, 12 rebounds a game, and I don't look for the score to translate. I mean, I think that's something that you kind of throw out the window. I mean, look at Tennessee; they signed James Daniel a couple of years ago. He averaged almost 30 points a game at Howard, and he was an okay player, but certainly not anybody that was going to go out and get 30 in the SEC. But rebounding is a different deal. I mean, if you kind of look across the board, going from college to the NBA or whatever, if you that's a skill that generally translates regardless of the level.
All right, let's go to a football question here. Rocky Top Rowdy 58. Finding the best 5 defensive backs is going to be fun to watch. Returning starters at 4 spots, but does anyone get shuffled around to get the best 5 on the field? How do they do this? I mean, where are they at, Jesse? You think with the star, does a corner move in? I mean, in years past, they've talked about maybe trying to slide somebody in there. Is Balen Buchanan just the X factor at this point at the star that could change kind of what that lineup looks like?
Yeah, I think Buchanan is absolutely the X factor, and kind of where he is health-wise, where he is in terms of Jeremy Pruitt's mind of athletic ability, because obviously he was a guy that Pruitt trusted and leaned on pretty heavily in that 2018 season. So let's say that he's just going to kind of be a wild card, and they feel like playing him in spot duty. I think Sham then has the star spot probably locked up. You got Taylor and Thompson on the outside, but while both of those guys are quote unquote starters, I think you're going to see Kenneth George rotate in and continue to play some snaps. McCullough, assuming the way this question is formed, they're assuming that Jaylen is a starter. I would agree that McCullough has a leg up on the job based on what he did at the end of the season, based on his upside. But it's not like he started a million games. So it's really then what happens at that other safety spot. Where does AP's boy Trayvon Flowers kind of fit in the mix in terms of health? Obviously, they love his upside, but can he practice 2 straight weeks in a row? I mean, that's been an issue. Does a guy like Theo Jackson kind of continue to just kind of maintain a spot on the field where no, he's not a stud, no, he's not a star, but he'll give you 30 snaps a game, and then you kind of play some other guys at that safety spot. And then the last name, I don't think he's going to be in the mix this fall. I just think he's still a little bit too green, too much to learn. But does Tyus Fields find his way on the field for maybe 10 snaps a game? That'll be something to watch early in the season.
All right, 2 questions. Go ahead.
I was going to say, don't forget Keyshawn. I think Keyshawn's a guy that could earn some time.
It's a good point.
Anywhere in the secondary.
Yeah, good point there. Not to forget about him because, but again, depends on when he gets here. All right, 2 questions, and we're out the door here. What we don't get to in the mailbag on the podcast, I'll try to jump in and answer those in the thread throughout the day today as well. But Jake Dog 13 Austin wants to know, give him one in-state prospect that Tennessee currently has momentum with in 2021 and one out-of-state prospect that Tennessee has momentum with in 2021.
Walker Merrill and Jalen Wright.
There you go. Simple answer there. All right. Mr. I'm not even going to try to do it. Your question is there anyone on the team, offensive, defense, whose speed alone makes them a big factor for playing time? Rob, let's start with you. Football, speed, just based on speed, who can get on the field? Offense, defense. Is there anybody?
D'Angelo Gibbs, maybe at receiver. I mean, is he that kind of guy? I mean, I look at that group and, I think maybe it's, we've not seen him. It's all speculation. But for me, I mean, he would be the first name that jumps to my mind on offense.
Yeah,
I would go Jalen Hyatt.
That's right.
I'm going to go with one of the freshman receivers, whether it's Hyatt, Callaway, or Weidman. And I don't know which one, but I mean, they recruited all 3 of those guys because they can hoof it.
Well, and here's the thing too, Rob. We know Jim Chaney has a history of being able to spoon feed the offense well enough to a freshman receiver to make them a productive player. See Justin Hunter, see Rick Rogers, and the production they had as a freshman. He doesn't necessarily say, hey, you got to learn X, Y, Z all at one time. He can give them 4 or 5 plays and spoon feed them into the offense to make them productive. We saw that a few years ago. So we'll see what happens with that. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Blue Water Climate Control Volquest.com mailbag podcast. Again, I'll jump in and get the rest of those that we didn't get to. The couple of things that sort of overlap, but I'll jump in and get to those on the message board. Keep the questions coming. We're going to continue to do a mailbag podcast each and every week, and then we'll continue with our Rocky Top Rewind. And then on Friday, we'll bring you the start of our last season rewind, where we just take a hard look at each game week by week throughout the season. But that's going to do it for this mailbag edition. For Rob Lewis, Jesse Simonton, and Austin Price, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.